And yo, I don't know who's out there right now, but college football is on the set tonight. We're going to review week number 2 in college football. For those of you who are interested in college football, bring it in here. We're going live. We're willing to take your information. We're willing to take your fandry or fandom and roll with it. But this is a good night tonight because there were a couple of good games, not exactly like week 1 or even week 0 or 0 week. This week, we had some interesting matchups, if nothing else at all, but we did get some pretty big results along the way as some teams collided, and the result from those collisions ended up being some surprises. First and foremost, I think the biggest upset of the day has to be number 5, Notre Dame, going down to MAC Conference, Northern Illinois. Now, that's something that's a huge surprise because going into the season, everybody thought that Notre Dame would be one of these teams to where we're just going to wonder if they're ultimately going to go to a conference. So let's make it difficult by not giving them a bye, kind of pinching them into going into a conference, because it was an afterthought whether or not they would get to the playoffs. No one even thought about whether or not they were going to the playoffs, put it that way. But as it turns out, something strange happened in South Bend, and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish got caught up in the mix, losing this early in the season as a 28.5-point favorite. Whoever might have taken that bet, you've made some money tonight if you took the money line. So that's a huge thing for people who want to gamble. But this is what we're going to try to do for the next couple of weeks, hopefully every week, depending on time, etc., wrapping up the college football week or football day for that particular week. This is the first time we're doing that, and we're going to try to be consistent with it. So let's go down the list of teams and players and all the anecdotes that may come along with this kind of a thing. First of all, the big game of the day that started off, at least, well, we thought about the matchup because this early in the season, with rankings are already out when they really should not matter. In fact, I think we should get to a point to where it only matters. The rankings should matter for the top 5 teams. I don't believe that it should matter for the top 25, because I think, generally speaking, for the first 5 teams, typically those teams are the powerhouse teams that are more likely to maintain their ranking longer, depending on the schedule, of course, but they should be able to withstand whatever schedule they do have. But nevertheless, I believe they should have the top 5 teams should be ranked, or even if they wanted to take it a step further, the top 10 teams should be ranked. The top 25 is so weak right now because anything happens, and we don't know what may happen with one team or another while it's going on. Teams stumbling over or teams not even being what they were expected to be. Case in point, last year, TCU lost to Georgia in the championship, not last season, but the year before. They lost to Georgia, were absolutely blown out. But then when they faced Colorado and Coach Prime coming onto the set on the 1A football scale, and people wanted to see if what he had done, which was completely unorthodox, I think bringing in over 80 different players from the previous season. He did not even have the same Colorado Buffaloes that he had inherited, which I believe won 1 game that year. He did not even have those guys. So he ends up coming to Colorado, revamped the entire team, and they made a big deal about his first game going on the road against TCU and how well or not well he might have done. Whereas virtually all of the production from that TCU team, regardless of getting blown out by Georgia, they were gone, including their quarterback, Max Duggan, who ended up going to the NFL. But either way, the production wasn't there. The players were there in the previous season, but they were still getting credit as if that team was the same team, and it wasn't. So as it ends up, hold on a second. I'm gonna have guest up here. Hey, what's up? We're in the middle of the conversation.
We got to come on for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. I was explaining, I came on explaining about what happened during this college football weekend for people who wanted to come in and join the conversation. They can do just that. You can either, I'll throw the link out there for those of you who may want the link to come in and participate in the conversation, represent your team if you want to talk about those guys, or you can just come in and click the link, cam up, join the conversation that way. In any event, today I was just talking about the big news that happened today. There was a couple of big news, but I think the biggest news was Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois at home at Notre Dame, when everyone kind of made it an afterthought of Notre Dame ultimately going to the playoffs this season, especially not even being in a conference.
A little bit of which.
So as it turned out, Notre Dame is not in the conference, but now it's a more tenuous situation for them because you're not in the conference. You have a loss. Strength of schedule is going to matter because, you lost to Northern Illinois. They do have other teams on their schedule in which when they do play, they could probably try to right the ship. So losing early probably is a better idea than losing late. But I don't think losing twice would help because of the quality of team they lost to now. If you would have lost to a number one team right now, it would be different because later on you can lose to a number one team early, kind of get back into it and lose to a tougher team or a tough team later. And it still may put you into the playoffs with 2 losses since there's now 12 teams. Can you hear me? But in any event, I was talking about Notre Dame and how things kind of just went awry for them just because they lost to Northern Illinois. More importantly, today, going into the weekend, Texas and Michigan, the huge matchup was what we were looking at. And as it turns out, I didn't believe it would be as huge a matchup. It was more of a name brand matchup, the blue blood matchup. And that's all it really was, a blue blood matchup of named teams, named coaches, I guess, but not even named coaches. But in any event, Michigan at home in the Big House, coming off of a very lackluster day in game against Fresno State the week before. Many excuses were made because of how they played against Fresno State, ultimately winning the game. Going into this game, well, they made it seem as if they had wrinkles that they were going to unwrinkle when Texas came in. They were hiding something from Fresno State so that Texas wouldn't be able to scout it in the next game. That's how they made it seem. Desmond Howard, when he was doing his show on ESPN with Game Day, he was kind of trying to convince pretty much the same thing. They didn't do whatever they needed to do against Fresno State. The first game of the season, of course, everyone knows about the mistakes and things that happened with the first game of the season. But as it turned out, Texas has the better team. If you watch our show, which is the Sports Bag Bros podcast, Mondays and Thursdays, we break down whatever the sports world has to offer at the time. But we talked about this game. And generally speaking, we picked Texas. I expected Texas to win pretty big, and pretty much that's what we got. Michigan lost way too many players from last season, first of all, including their coach. So you lose your head coach. But you know what? Last year, they were still able to play and win without Jim Harbaugh, who was suspended last season. And so the team was able to play, continue to play, and do well when that had happened. But this is a different team. Last year was senior laden, especially along the offensive line. You had a tremendous offensive line at Michigan, and that's why J.J. McCarthy was able to stand back in the pocket and throw when he did throw and do effectively doing it. And Blake Corum was able to run effectively as he was able to do, along with Donovan Edwards, who's back this year, but it's a completely different story this time around with a different offensive line. Last year's senior-laden offensive line had oodles of experience. In fact, the incoming players who joined that offensive line, which was already solid to begin with, Ladarius Henderson, a senior coming from Arizona State, joining that line, was a captain of his previous team at Arizona State, bringing that leadership and that experience to Michigan and their offensive line. On the other hand, you had Blake Nugent. He came in from Stanford. So he was another one, a grad player. You know what I mean? So he was one of these players that had already graduated, was the captain of his team. He comes to Michigan, solidifying and anchoring, and all of them, by the way, were drafted. They went to the NFL. And he came and solidified that offensive line. And we see the result we ultimately had gotten with Michigan going and winning the national championship and pretty much dominating along the way, including Ohio State. So they get to this team now that doesn't have the experience. So I think it's the same thing every year. People think about what happened in the previous season. They try to outsmart themselves of, well, this player returned, that player returned, so this is what should happen. Or this player did not return, but they probably had addition by subtraction, things like that. But it wasn't like that with Michigan. Even at home, the home field advantage didn't matter at all. Texas just had the better team, the better roster. Everything was just good for Texas, and they were able to handle Michigan relatively easy. And when you think about it, you go in with Ewers, the quarterback, and he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. And Quinn Ewers has been a Heisman Trophy candidate, I guess, since he's been on campus at Ohio State. It was seemed like by a few people, I guess, experts, thought that he would ultimately be a Heisman Trophy candidate one day. And here we are. He is. He had an opportunity last season, but he was injured. So he didn't really get a chance to do it all year long, but then he came back kind of solid, looked good. But then now he's back full-fledged, looking good. For me, well, the Heisman is a college award. That goes without saying. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're the best player, period, when you get it. It seems to be the player who's most effective on the most prominent team these days. If you play for an excellent team and you're probably the leader of that team as a quarterback, you're likely going to win it. Or if you're a running back really playing well, if you got 2,000 yards and the guy on the 5-5 team or 5-6 team got 2,000 yards, you're probably going to get the Heisman. Especially if you're probably going to the playoffs or have a real shot at the national championship. That's just how it's going to work. Or if you're in a better conference, someone from the Mountain West doing what you're doing isn't going to be as heavily weighted heavily weighed as it would be if you were in the SEC or the Big Ten. Now you have the Power 4 conferences since the Pac-12 is now pretty much gone. You have Arizona State and you have you have Arizona State and Oregon State and Washington State still in I guess Pac-12-ish thing with just two teams. I mean, they could even go back to the Pac-8 days before 1978, and they still need 16 for that. But, you get my drift, though. The Pac-12 no longer exists the way it once existed, so we have a Power 4 conference, and that Power 4 conference exists of the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12, and the ACC. And the premier conferences out of those conferences are the SEC and Big 10. The Big 12 wishes that it was. And by the way, the Big 10, I guess, brand name alone, that's it, because they have so many teams there, teams from other parts of the country that don't belong in the Midwest. So that's what we ended up having. But anyway, Michigan was able to dominate what was going on. And Texas was able to dominate Michigan. God, what the hell am I messing up for? But Texas was able to dominate Michigan. And the part about this with Texas is their running back situation. Before the season started, they had some injuries at the running back spot, but Texas is completely deep. And one of the benefits of being in a state like Texas is you have a plethora of just football talent everywhere. And I believe since Texas is the flagship team of the state of Texas, even though Texas A&M is there, but Texas is Texas, it's the flagship team of the state of Texas. Even the middle of the pack diehard player who grew up just wanting to play for Texas is still a quality player. If he went somewhere else, they probably would start or really get playing time, kind of like Florida would do when their players leave. But in Texas, even their middle tier players are quality enough players to really contribute in Texas if something were to happen. And something did happen. C.J. Baxter got injured. And then after that, Christian Clark got injured. This is all preseason, an Achilles injury. So they ran today with Jaden Blue and Jared Gibson. Now, Jared Gibson is not from Texas. He's from Gainesville, Florida. He went to IMG Academy, a football factory. As you know, they don't play for state championships in the state of Florida. They're in Florida, but they get players from throughout the entire country. But Texas was able to just beat Michigan relatively easy today. And that's, I guess, the big game we're talking about that happened today on paper going into this. But for people who kind of knew better, I did not at least believe that Texas would have much of a problem. I don't know. It was a 7.5 line. It worked its way down to 7 points. And we saw what the end result was. Texas had a pretty easy time. Jermaine is in the house. Is the house on fire?
No, Deion did it. That's why I watched this whole game, this whole Colorado game, because I was glancing at some of the other games, but this Colorado Nebraska game had most of my attention because I wanted to see week 2 how would the Sanders show would come off, and it didn't come off so good tonight for Team Deion, called Coach Prime, as he like to be called.
It looks like we have a Nebraska fan that had come through. This is the Sports Back Bros podcast site right now. We're just doing a college show right now, but Bias is the other part of the Sports Back Bros podcast. A huge Nebraska Cornhusker fan, and of course, one of those fans that's happy as hell tonight that Deion Sanders got what he deserved, I guess, according to the masses, because getting all of this attention for a team that ended 4-8 last year when they started off really well. So that means it ended very poorly to still end up 4-8 going into this season. Now with a new, true Nebraska team heading back to its glory days, we see what Nebraska was able to do to them today. Pretty much beat them down. It was 28-0 before they even scored. And then a couple of, I guess, gifts were thrown out there to make it a little closer than what it was. But Shedeur Sanders, I don't know really what to say about him, because people would think that you're a hater if you say what they don't want to hear. But if you tell them exactly what you think and it's an opinion anyways, well, they don't like that either. You know what I mean? And regardless of what he had done that proved that he may not be as good as people think, well, they'll say it's one game. I'm saying, no, it's one game against a quality team, and we see what happens when he plays a quality team. He still gets sacked, so the offensive line isn't great. And the team still can't run the ball, so the offensive line isn't great. And this is what we have. So that's one of the big games as well. Nebraska beat Colorado, and Coach Prime catches an L. I think this is obviously not the only L he's going to catch throughout the season. He's going to catch many more L's.
Mm-hmm. If I can interject, Travis, before the brief time I'm going to be on here, what the hell is going on with Florida State? 0-2 and all this.
Well, with Florida State, I think the problem is the mass exodus. The mass exodus from last season because of the snub during bowl time is the reason why some of these players left. And I think it also looked at the ACC and they realized that, you know what, you can go undefeated in the ACC and still not get your opportunity to be in the championship game or even the playoffs. Now, the playoffs are expanded this year, but then we look at the expanded playoffs and you see that it's primarily Big Ten and SEC teams. And it was Big Ten and SEC plus Notre Dame. But after what happened in Northern Illinois coming down to South Bend today, it's not even that anymore. So Notre Dame ultimately dropped. Now, should they drop out of the top 10? I believe so. You lost to a MAC team, Northern Illinois. The last time I think Northern Illinois was relevant, Kevin the Burner Turner was there running the ball. Come on, I mean, relevant. They were only relevant because he ran the ball well. But Notre Dame's now out of it, at least for right now. But there are 12 teams that can go in, not just 10. So if they win out, they can ultimately bounce themselves back in because they have a strong enough schedule to where they can get back from where they were.
But a beatdown at Tennessee whooped the Wolfpack 51 to look like 10. I can't see real well.
51-10.
Yeah,
I think that happened. North Carolina State, I don't know why they were ranked that high. And if you heard earlier in the show, I was talking about why I don't believe that. I think teams in the top 5 need to be ranked. I don't think teams in the top 25. I think if you want to start the season off well, start the teams off in the top 5. If you start off in the top 5, you at least know those power teams are not likely to lose. or if you look at their schedule, you could probably be a little bit more judicious about how you pick it. But with the way things are, I mean, you're ranking 20 teams in the top 25. You're kind of force-feeding some of these teams into the ranking. And when the season starts, you realize they're not as good as you thought they were, and they start losing. Then you have to start moving things around anyway. And then when they start really voting later on, when it does matter, you have a hodgepodge of nonsense going on. But either way, Notre Dame's, for right now, is out of it because of the Northern Illinois loss. And that was one of those games because they were a 28.5-point favorite. No one really paid attention to it other than Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame themselves. And it seems like they really didn't pay attention. They were booby-trapped and lost the game. So there were other games that were played. Georgia playing Tennessee Tech. Another blowout of the game. Coming off with the Clemson game. Beating up on Clemson and only giving up 3 points. Well, they do it again. They only give up 3 points, and it was at the end of the game against Tennessee Tech. Carson Beck going into this season as a Heisman Trophy candidate, 5 touchdowns. I mean, when you look at the schools that they do it against, you wonder if it's important. Is it just stat padding? Now, I don't think it's stat padding. You're just playing. It's stat padding when you leave them in there to throw 10 because you could have done it, but they didn't do it. So Georgia showing up big time. And I tell you what, even though it was a pretty bad, poor sister team in Tennessee Tech, you could see the missing ingredient in this game. You can see the missing ingredient on the Georgia team. And going back to last week against Clemson, and that was Trevor Etienne, the running back, Travis Etienne, brother of
that guy, man.
Trevor Etienne. He didn't play last week against Clemson because of his DUI back in March, so he was suspended for a game. But he got today, even though it was just Tennessee Tech, I'm not making more out of it than I should, but he puts up the numbers that other guys just didn't put up. And I think he's the better running back on the roster right now than anyone they have presently. And the reason why they brought him in and allowed him, signed him, coming from the University of Florida, where he was their top running back. So now he's in Georgia, and now he gets a chance to play in his first game, breaks 100 yards, has a high yards per carry average, all the things you would expect against a team like Tennessee Tech. And here we are.
So, put a little bit of minutes before I check out on you, man. Ready for week 1 tomorrow, NFL?
Week 1 of NFL start tomorrow, and I think all NFL fans are certainly down with it. I'll be watching, of course, but the NFL, it's starting off. It started off on Thursday, really, but the full swing is starting tomorrow, and then it goes into Monday when 49ers play against the Jets, and we'll just run from there. But we got some people coming in right now. Let me see. I'm watching from Bangladesh. So we got somebody here from Bangladesh watching the show right now. Gosh, from Bangladesh. But is it a coach from Bangladesh? Maybe not. I'm watching from Bangladesh. Wow. Well, if you're watching from Bangladesh and you're watching college football, I don't know what to say. College football in the U.S. Soccer. But hey, I'll take it. But also, we have, let me see, Salute. That's right, Salam. That's Bosco from the Bronx. He's come on this show before. We talk boxing, talk sports.
From the Bronx, huh? He's right. I'm in Soundview, so.
Well, he's a college football guy who lives in North Carolina now, so he's completely not in the Bronx anymore, but certainly representing nevertheless. But either way you look at it, what's going on today in college football, you have a bunch of matchups like we expect to have. Not a bunch of ranked teams, but we got surprising endings like I was talking about, with Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. If you want to go down the list, Illinois beating Kansas State, beating Kansas. I mean, another upset win, something we weren't expecting, but it happened. And so just another wrap up of college football. If you want to come in on this conversation, I mean, you can do it, because I'll put the link out here right now. In fact, let me just drop that link real quick for anyone who might want to check the link. Let me see if they want to check the link.
Travel may take a bow before my phone cut out on me again.
All right.
But it was fun talking.
I can hold the fort anyway. Anyone who wants to come in and just throw their message out there.
Fun chopping it up. Fun chopping it up, buddy.
Well, we can chop it up as you're getting chopped off because your signal's going out. I don't know if your phone is dying or not. But thanks for joining anyway, Jermaine. I'll catch you probably next week if we go ahead and do this again. And in the meantime, I can still we could break down some more college football this week. It's a wrap-up show, so you could come in with your own team. It doesn't have to be just SEC. It doesn't have to be just ACC. Let's break down some anecdotal things that happened as well. I think Nico Malalieva, he came and played today with Tennessee, part of that blowout just now against North Carolina State. I think he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. I think he should have done more in the air, but if you watched the game, you saw what he's able to do on the ground and in the air. And obviously with things being the way they are with college football now, and him playing for a high-profile team in the best conference, in my opinion now, which is the SEC, the Big Ten is up there, but I think the SEC is more top-heavy and has gotten better now because they've added Texas and Oklahoma. And with what Texas did to Michigan today, kind of solidified the SEC strong. But at the same time, we could say Alabama struggled against South Florida, but they struggled against South Florida last year. It still, came out and got into the playoffs. So they struggled against, but still won. And another thing, during that struggle with South Florida, I look at Jalen Monroe. Going into the season, he is another Heisman Trophy candidate. After this game, I think it was a Heisman Trophy candidate. And the reason why I say that, Jalen Monroe last season, he didn't play well in the beginning. In fact, against South Florida, he didn't play that game. Coach Saban, who was the coach back then, as you may know if you watch college football, he had Ty Simpson, and then he put in Ty Bruckner. The two Tys were in there. They were quarterback in Alabama, and it was a miserable game in bad weather in Tampa. I've been to that stadium several times. I know exactly how it can be. I live in Florida, so I know how the weather could be. But this was a talent thing in which talent alone should have won. But as it turned out, Jalen Monroe didn't play in that game because he played poorly before. You had two quarterbacks that probably weren't ready to be there. I thought Ty Bruckner was, because he did come from, he came from, I think he came from Duke. Wherever he came from, I think it was, let me see. They played South Carolina. Let me see. Notre Dame. But I'm talking about Ty Bruckner. I was at the Gator Bowl when he played against Notre Dame and got the MVP of the game. Comes from Notre Dame to Alabama. I thought he would get the job because his offensive coordinator came along with him. Well, he didn't make it. Ty Simpson was too young. And then ultimately, Jalen Monroe got back in. And Jalen Monroe built himself to a point to where he became a Heisman Trophy candidate even last season. So I thought it would be a continuation of being a very good quarterback going into this season. But even with Nick Saban leaving, he's a defensive guy. Kalen DeBoer comes in from Washington, the runner-up from last year's national championship game, or last season's national championship game. He's an offensive mind. So I thought it went hand in hand to be able to teach Jalen Monroe how to be a better quarterback. And apparently that did not happen, because his numbers tonight, I can't see them right now because I'm doing everything by memory because this is the first show. Should have written things down, but bro, let's go with the memory. But anyways, if you watch the game, you saw he didn't look very good. You saw he didn't run the ball very effectively, but then it became a talent game in Tuscaloosa, to where they were able to pull it off and win the game. But that's not a game they should be proud of. But at the same time, they should have been proud after last year's game against South Florida, and they still made it to the college football playoffs. So there's something to be said about that. That does matter. But let me go down a list of teams here, and if it catches my eye. So I've already talked about Georgia playing Texas Tech. Georgia playing Tennessee Tech, blowing them out. They could have scored 80 on them if they wanted to, but you put a lot of young guys in, get some experience while you can before the schedule gets roughed up. And then you had, Jermaine and I just talked about what Colorado was doing against, what Colorado had done against Nebraska. Nebraska just putting a whooping on them in Lincoln. And I'm looking at some of the comments right now. Let me see. I lived in Soundview as a kid. Oh, yeah, he must have been talking when Jermaine was on. Jermaine's in the Bronx. And Soundview, as us Bronx guys know, is in the Bronx as well. I lived in the Castle Hill area at one point, and that's close enough to Soundview for people who know. But, yeah, those are our problems. Those are bro problems from the Bronx. And there's another comment that came up, well, from my own, from the other site that we're on, so hide that. But either way, college football going on today. I want to go down the list. If you want to come in, make sure you just hit the link. If you hit the link, you can come in on the conversation. You can leave a message and come in on the conversation that way. We're going to try to do this every night. So we're going to have some kinks along the way because I hadn't done it like this before. It's been planned out, but more planned in my mind instead of writing it down like I should have done. So I'm kind of like everywhere right now. But either way, more games to talk about. And if you want to talk about your team, come right ahead and do it. I don't know everything. There are over 130 Division 1A teams playing right now. I don't know every player on every team. Don't even know that every team played or not. But I do know what I know, and those are the games we're talking about now. If you want to add your 2 cents, 3 cents, or whatever cents, you can do that too. And Miami, the Miami Hurricanes, number 12 team in the country, they took on FAMU today. Yeah, I know it's not a big game. I guess in that second week, you play the teams like FAMU, the lesser teams. Every now and then you get a bone thrown out there like Michigan and Texas, or now I should say like Notre Dame and Northern Illinois. Yeah, right. But Miami, new look Miami, offensive line playing well, but what can you really gauge based on playing FAMU, even though they are the defending Black college champions from last year playing in the Celebration Bowl, winning their first Celebration Bowl, by the way. You know, I've been a part of the Celebration Bowl several times in the past, so I do know a little bit, or if not quite a bit, about HBCU football, so that kind of helps in this respect. But I remember today Miami just looked good. I watched that game and pieces of so many other games. The offensive line is still strong. The running game was strong. Cam Ward is still looking ridiculous, but if you're looking ridiculous against FAMU, you're supposed to. You know, last week, he wasn't supposed to look as ridiculous against the Gators in the Swamp, where Florida had a 33-game winning streak on the line, and Miami made it look easy in the Swamp, which typically doesn't happen. I think we're getting to a point where we can say bye-bye to Billy Napier before he even gets to Tallahassee at the end of the season to play the Florida State Seminoles. And the only reason why Florida State won't get rid of their coach is because of his contract extension. That's why. But I don't know. Let me know if I'm speaking too fast for you. It sounds like a damn auctioneer at times. We get all this information out. I'm doing it all off the top of my head. There isn't anything written down, so things are a little bit all over the place. I should have done a better job of just writing it down and just saying it. But I can look at the scores and just kind of hit it from there because I did watch a lot of these games today. And once again, Miami, FAMU, Miami looking good like they should do against a team like that. Or should I say they should, because Notre Dame supposedly was supposed to look good against Northern Illinois, and it didn't turn out that way. But Miami looking fantastic. Number 12 team. Now they're going to get tougher, but the ACC isn't that tough this year. Cam Ward looking excellent. The wide receivers looking excellent. The defense playing well, even without Ruben Bain, who's going to be out for, I guess, even the Ball State game next week. He may be back for the South Florida game. He has a soft tissue injury. I believe it's a calf, so he'll be back. But the defensive line is on fire, and everything is clicking the right way. And if the Canes can win the ACC, this will be the first time they've ever won the ACC since they came into the ACC from the Big East after dominating the Big East and winning national championships. But yeah, FAMU was the victim this time. And let's not sleep on FAMU altogether. In this age of transfer portal, FAMU has gotten stronger. They've gotten some Division 1A players who have come into the program. And so it's not going to be like Miami or some of the bigger schools, but they're looking better. They are defending, like I mentioned before, Black college national champions. In fact, back in 1979, I think if you want to go back that far, FAMU did win the entire 1AA national championships. That was in 78, in fact, because Albert Chester Sr. was the quarterback then. In 79, his brother was playing then, and they beat Jim Kelly and the Miami Hurricanes. So there's a tie-in of how FAMU and Miami have played one another. And hey, FAMU stole one from them back when Jim Kelly was there. So yeah, do your research. You'll find that out. And this is also the first year that FAMU's playing without their coach, I think in 6 years, with Willie Simmons, the former Clemson quarterback. He was coaching FAMU for the past 6 years, I think 6 or 7 years. Never had a losing season in terms of being a head coach, either at Prairie View or here at FAMU. He's now moved on, going to Duke as a running backs coach right now. And I always knew he would leave because this is the same Willie Simmons who played for Clemson years ago. Lost his job, I think, to Woody Dantzler and left from there to go to the Citadel and ended his career in college with the Citadel. So I knew that he had those big college aspirations, but he went the path he had to go to get to where he's going now. So Willie Simmons did a great job with FAMU in terms of recruiting and overall. James Colsey III is now the coach there. And he played for Florida State and Mickey Andrews' defense back in the day. So there's a lot of Tallahassee tie-ins there, so Colsey III is now the coach there. He still has some good players on that team, but they'll do well with the SWAC, the Southwestern Athletic Conference. And when they do play in the Celebration Bowl against the champions of the MEAC, they'll play against them. So he'll be back when he's in his lane. He'll go back to being, or their team will go back to being a pretty dominant team, I think, because I don't see anyone else who's going to do anything in the SWAC or even MEAC for that matter, even though traditionally North Carolina A&T, North Carolina Central, and South Carolina State defensively in particular does well. So let's move on from that. I'm sure that you probably didn't want to hear all of this kind of thing. Once again, I'm doing it off the top of my head. A lot of things going on, and it's late. It's past 11 o'clock here Eastern time. So let's keep going down the list. We talked about Colorado and Nebraska. If you listen to the Sports Bag Bros podcast, you would have heard how we picked Nebraska over Colorado. And it wasn't just big against Coach Prime. I think Nebraska is better coached. Matt Rule is a very good college coach. It may not have worked out for him in Carolina, but as a college coach, he's a very good college coach. And going by the way recruiting has gone for him, he's recruited players to solidify being a good coach, not to mention getting the best quarterback, Dylan Raiola, to campus, a legacy player who his father, Dominic Raiola, played for Nebraska, played for the Detroit Lions in the NFL. He's just meant to be with Nebraska, and he led the way tonight, running game and so forth, and they were able to get a very significant win. And as a true freshman, he was able to do that. Oh, my God. Now, there's a game that's on right now, by the way. I'm looking at the score. Oregon is actually losing right now to Boise State. And the reason why I brought that up is because, in week 1 or even 0 week, players either come out of the woodwork or teams come out of the woodwork that show somewhat of a trajectory, and you really can't tell at the moment. And the reason why you can't tell is because you don't know, like I kind of mentioned before, who's left, who came. Is the chemistry there? Is the team really legitimate? Is that number 5 team really number 5, or they're number 15 team in disguise, or even not in the 12, 25? Well, I thought going into this game that Boise State, I wasn't looking whether Boise State was going to win or lose. My biggest thing was wondering if Ashton Jeanty, the running back for Boise State, who ran for 267 yards last week against Georgia Southern and 6 touchdowns, I wanted to see if he's going to be legit in Autzen Stadium against Dan Lanning's team. And hey, we look to see what we got right here. All right, the Sunbelt Billy is definitely on his way out. I'm sorry that I didn't catch it earlier. Sunbelt Billy is definitely on the way out. I mean, there's no other way around it. Billy Napier has been given the state of Florida, where I believe for the most part, I think it's gone down a little bit over the years, has the most football playing talent in the country, high school wise. Texas gets the Friday night lights, they get the movies, but I think the state of Florida kind of speaks for itself when you look at about 80% or more of their players coming from the state of Florida. And in the past 40 years, we're talking about 11 national championships between Florida State, and Miami. Texas, for all the hoopla and all the praise, all those players that stay in Texas primarily, when Florida has a bunch of mercenaries who ultimately leave Florida and go other places to make teams better, other teams better outside of Florida, Texas has 2 national championships, and this is since 1969. Bro, I'm just a messenger that happened to research that years ago, and it hadn't changed. So another story for another day, I guess. So in any event, though, I want to see if this Ashton Jeanty could do really well as a running back here, because just because we didn't know about these guys don't mean that they weren't good players until they showed up. Because Barry Sanders, for instance, in 1988, Barry Sanders made the Playboy All-American team. But we look back on it now saying, hell, he should have been the Playboy All-American team, but he was a junior. But he wasn't there for being a running back. He was there for being a kickoff returner because he was an outstanding kickoff returner because Thurman Thomas was the starting running back. Well, when the season started of 1988, it ended up being the year he won the Heisman. Barry Sanders went crazy. I think there was one run within 4 games or 5 games. He had like 1,500 yards, and they called it a tour de force. So we know the whole story, over 2,600 yards, or all these yards that he ran for. It could have been even more yards if they added the postseason yards like they do now, because I believe he had like 222 yards against Wyoming in the Holiday Bowl at the old Jack Murphy Stadium. The memory's crazy, but it comes and goes. But that's what he had done. So if they added his numbers from then to then, he'll be even closer to 3,000 yards in the season. So with Jeanty, Ashton Jeanty, I'm wondering are those yards against Georgia Southern because they're not a powerhouse team, or is he going to take his act now to the new Big Ten team in Oregon and be able to be effective as a running back there? That's what I want to know. And so that's why I have some interest in it. And if I want to click on here, because I got some things, it's at halftime right now. I'm expecting Oregon to still win. They're down by just 6, 20-14 halftime. And we're going to look at the stats real quick and see what has happened. And so far, so good. He's averaging over 6 yards a carry. So he had 14 carries for 85 yards. So 6.1 yards a carry, but that kind of pales in comparison to last week's 13.4 yards per carry when he had 267 yards. But anytime you get 6 yards or more in college, you're probably a special back. In the NFL, if it's 4.5 yards, you're a good back. When you start hitting 5 yards, you're a special back in the NFL. In college, I think it's 6 yards or 6.5 yards. That's when you're more of a special back. And it has to be within a more traditional running circumstance. I don't think you can have one of these gimmicky offenses and put up all of these ridiculous numbers and people can transition that over to the NFL and say, you know what, you should have the same amount of respect. You know what I mean? Because you can have the run and shoot, which has like wide open lanes, like a guy named Chuck Weatherspoon had, who was Andre Ware's running back at Houston years ago, and he was averaging nearly 10 yards a carry. He gets drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, in like the 9th round. Doesn't do anything because he just wasn't that kind of back. The numbers came from the run and shoot offense, not because of his real ability to read defenses and run a more traditional offense. So or even the wishbone, which is based so much on deception. You get someone in the wishbone and they're averaging like years ago, the running back from Oklahoma, James Pruitt. James Pruitt averaged a whole bunch of yards, nearly 9, 10 yards a carry himself. And that was for the season. But it was the wishbone based on deception, sleight of hand, that kind of thing. So, but anyway, getting back to the original point, I wanted to see if he's going to do well. Jeanty is going to do well against Oregon. So far, so good. Looks like he's going ahead. He's only 15 yards away from a 100-yard game. But we need another 200-plus yard game to really start taking him really serious for a Heisman Trophy as a running back, especially now with devalued running backs in the NFL. But this is college. You can go down a litany of other running backs from the past who put up phenomenal numbers, and it just didn't translate to the NFL. Rashaan Salaam, over 2,000 yards. Ron Dayne, over 2,000 yards. Troy Davis for Iowa State did it twice. He didn't even get to the NFL. He played in Canada. Nothing wrong with that. So, but even going out to, who was that? Byron Hanspard played for Texas Tech. Another one, the Pentecostal pastor who had like a 0.0 GPA, still managed to play over 2,000 yards. So we don't know how that translated over. But either way, let me see. Got another one coming up. Let me see. Nebraska with Raiola as quarterback is the better team, and I believe they hit the portal. Well, I think they do hit the portal. I think everyone hits the portal other than Dabo Swinney, and he needs to get on top of it before things start getting a little too tenuous up there in Clemson. And the reason why is because and I understand it, and if you listen to the Sports Bag Bros podcast, I mentioned it before about he wants to be the one to tell the parents that your kid can come to school and we're going to really nurture him. We're not going to turn him away, even if he doesn't turn out to be the player we want. We're not going to get rid of him and bring someone from the outside in just to replace him and throw him to the side. And I understand how parents are. I've been in households before when recruiters have come in and spoken to kids, and you hear what they have to say, and they tell you pretty much the same thing. And I understand this is probably what he wants to be able to say, which most coaches can't say. And he wants to be able to convey that message to the mom, the father, whoever the guardian is, and let them know that your player will be taken care of. And it's noble. But nobility in this case could get you fired if you're not getting the wins, because it's still football and it's still business and it's still the South and it's still religion. So you're going to have to do something. So he's going to ultimately have to go in the portal, and you don't have to do it wholesale. You can cherry pick, do like Alabama did. You can do like Georgia has done. 23 players left Georgia. 10 players came in from the portal. Not the entire team, 10 players. They cherry picked those players. And you see, I mentioned before during the show, Colby Young from Miami went to the portal, came to Georgia. Trevor Etienne came from Florida, went to the portal, came to Georgia. London Humphreys came from Vanderbilt. Bad teams don't mean that they have all bad players. I think London Humphreys proves that, because London Humphreys is a blazing fast player. In fact, I think if they really want to use him in the offense like Ladd McConkey, he's Ladd McConkey, not just because he's white. He's blazing fast and faster than Ladd McConkey. And I thought Ladd McConkey was special. In fact, the reason why I picked him as my rookie of the year going into the 2024 NFL season. The intelligence, the tenacity, the skills, all of those things. That's why. But yeah, so Dabo Swinney is going to have to get on board. And another thing about the portal, when you go into the portal, you're not guaranteed to get taken anyway, for someone to take you anyway. It's not guaranteed. But just as important, the players who go into the portal, I explained this before on the show as well. The players who go into the portal, those are typically the people who don't make the team or don't get the playing time they think they deserve. When was the last time you saw the starting player leaving a team, a top team, and leaving to go somewhere else? Unless there was something extenuating, like a coaching change, or like butting heads with the coaches. And if you're butting heads with the coaches, why would another coach really want you? But if like Nick Saban left last season, when he left Alabama last season, players just kind of made a mass exodus, and we saw how that happened. One player in particular, what was it? The kid, Proctor, the offensive lineman from Iowa, the top offensive lineman in the country back in 2023, started as a true freshman with Alabama, Caden Proctor, 6'7" or 6'8", 352 pounds. A little bit slow because they were going around him last year, but he got that experience. But when Nick Saban left. He felt betrayed because he committed to Nick Saban instead of Alabama. So when Nick Saban left, especially without telling him until it was late, he left. But then DeBoer came in and kept in touch with him and let him know what he had planned for him. He comes back because he did go back to Iowa. And then he left Iowa to come back to Alabama. He had to get his head right. And you could give a pass to a 19-year-old kid because, you know, the emotions are going up and down, and it could be catastrophic for them, because I'm not going to say they're flaky. In this regard, I think these players Nick Saban's legendary. You know what I mean? I expect the same thing that would happen with Kirby Smart. If he left, bro, people are going to leave Georgia because they're now committed. Now, Georgia, like Alabama, they're just so traditionally rich that you do have players who grow up from the very beginning only wanting to play for Alabama, only wanted to play for Georgia. And if they got a scholarship somewhere else that they didn't believe was a top school, bro, they would walk on to Georgia or walk on to Alabama. You could get a scholarship to Georgia Southern. They could guarantee you playing time on your first day, and you still know, I want to play for Georgia. And if I have to walk on, I'll do it. We've seen those circumstances. We've seen that same circumstance even with Nebraska players and their walk-on program. And you look at these stories, man, he walked on and became a star. No, it's typically not players just walking on out of the blue and becoming stars because they love football. They've turned down other opportunities. They just love the university that much. They want to come and play for Nebraska. But anyway, look how far off I've gotten on the tangent. And looking at all these teams out here that we can still talk about. And Oregon game is the game I wanted to talk about real quick and get it out there. And another team now, I think you have to open your eyes with, and that team is Syracuse. Syracuse beat Georgia Tech, number 23 Georgia Tech today. Syracuse wasn't expected to do much of anything this year. They had a bad history recently. I thought Dino Babers, their former coach, would get them back on track, and he did for a little while, but then they lose at the end, and there's nothing to be said. So he gets fired. They bring in Fran Brown. He comes in, a former Georgia defensive back coach. He's been a defensive back for so many years. He's originally a Jersey guy from New Jersey. So, hey, that northeastern area, he's in Syracuse now. Syracuse brought in Kyle McCord, who came from Ohio State last year. So Kyle McCord couldn't get a clear answer from Ryan Day or whether or not he was going to get the job or keep the job when he went to a state of Iowa, if he stayed on Ohio State, because Devin Brown was there. And of course, they were going to look in the portal because Kyle didn't look that great last year. He looked okay, but for Ohio State standards, you got to do better than okay. And as it turned out, he ends up leaving, going to Syracuse, has a very good day today, and he's showing real progress when you watch him play. Well, Georgia Tech, as you know, went out to Dublin, beat Florida State, but now we're seeing that everyone's beating Florida State, and I don't think we should take that with a grain of salt, because that same Florida State team last year had the same troubles with Boston College. So for them to lose in Tallahassee with DJ Uiagalelei, he's a horrible quarterback. That's just the way it is. He wasn't that good with Clemson. He wasn't that good with Oregon State. Now he took his show on the road again to Tallahassee, and we're seeing the results. He is not a good quarterback. Florida State is going to have several issues this year with him as the starting quarterback. And if he's the best they have, it's only going to get worse. And I hate it for that. And I'm a Canes fan. I'm supposed to not like Florida State. I hate the Gators. I just take it like that. I hate them. But as far as Florida State goes, I would like for them to be better, so when they come down to Miami and I go to that game in October, I can watch the beatdown I deserve to watch, because I went out to Tallahassee along with Bias. He came down from the Chicago area from the Sports Bag Bros podcast. He came down, brought his son. We went to Tallahassee, caught the Florida State Miami game, excellent atmosphere, but the Canes lost. So that's ended up happening. So I need to go down to Miami this year to get some get back, because it looks good the way things are turning out right now. Playing against Florida State down in Miami, that's going to work out. And by the way, I was supposed to go to Oregon for the Ohio State game, and I couldn't do that this time around because so many other things just happened. Life happens. But if you knew me for any period of time, for people out there who may watch and do know, you know I get to games. I just go anytime. But this is a game I just can't go anytime like I want. I typically can take a plane out of Florida on a Friday night, be back in Jacksonville by Sunday night. That's how I've been doing it. But anyways, I'll be going down to Miami for the game against Florida State. That's just one of those things that happened. Last year, I went up to South Carolina for the Gators versus South Carolina. I was going up there hoping the Gators would lose, and they didn't, and kind of ruined a good trip. But anyways, yeah, but Syracuse looks like they're trying to do something in the ACC. I don't think they will be a formidable team. I think they'll be a decent team, but Kyle McCord is legit. And I think now with Fran Brown as the coach, I think legitimate. And the reason why, going back to that northeastern area, he's a Jersey guy. And for those of you who keep up with high school football, Jersey is one of those hidden gems that has sporadic players that are quality players that come out of that Jersey area and play very well if you cherry pick the right ones. I think that Greg Schiano, he picked some of those players because Rutgers is the state university of Jersey, but because of his ties down in Miami when he was the defensive coordinator, he's also able to get those players from down here, like all the other people scavenge off of Florida players. I mean, it's ridiculous how many teams come to the state of Florida to cure their ills elsewhere. So now you just don't have Florida State, and Miami. You now have FIU, FAU. You still have the HBCUs such as Bethune-Cookman and FAMU, and now you have South Florida and UCF. Blow everybody coming here in the state of Florida itself, and then people on the outside taking players. Georgia, Oklahoma, California. Mike Williams years ago went out to California with Carson Palmer. You look at Tommy Frazier, went from Florida all the way to Nebraska, curing everybody's ills and not keeping the home talent here. That's what Texas doesn't have. People who leave all the time. Texas let people leave because those people don't have any more room for those people. People leave Florida because they're mercenaries, man. They just go anywhere. Case in point, Ohio State blowing everybody out right now. Wide receiver wise, they have a true freshman, Jeremiah Smith. And Jeremiah Smith, the number one wide receiver in this past recruiting class. I wanted him so badly for Miami. He's practically in Miami's backyard at Chaminade Madonna High School here in Florida. He, along with his teammate, JoJo Trader, they were excellent players, blew out everybody last year. Chaminade Madonna was absolute state champs. They blew out Don Bosco Prep up there in Jersey, which is a national power, blew them out, just blew the doors off them, over 50 points. And then he goes to Ohio State and not Miami. But Miami gets JoJo Trader. But even though I appreciate JoJo Trader and how good he was, those two guys were on the same team. But Jeremiah's a different animal. He's already had over 100 yards tonight again. Well, not again, but tonight as a true freshman at Ohio State. And that's insane. And he has Will Howard throwing to him. Will Howard from Kansas State throwing to him. So he's going to get so many opportunities. He's a big guy, fast guy. He's one of these guys you can see right now that he's going to the NFL one day. If in the perfect world of no injuries and no idiocy off the field, he's going into the NFL. But and Chaminade Madonna, by the way, ends up losing to what was it? Don Bosco Prep? No, it was John Bosco out in California. The reason why they lost all the players from last year, so they came down in and beat them. No excuse. That's just the way high school ball is. Bosco lost players too. Mater Dei loses players, and IMG loses players. You got to replenish. But anyway, Syracuse is a team that's going to probably start moving along and doing some things as well. And so, whoa, man, I'm making this thing a lot longer than it should be, right? But let me see, this kind of going down the list of all the games that need to be talked about, or some of these games. If you want to talk about one of your teams, I'll put the link out there. If you want to click on the link to come in and talk about your team, or if you just want to put a message in and shout out or whatever you want to do, go ahead and do that as well. I'll continue to check the list of games that are out. USC is ahead of Utah State, to be expected. They're not going to have any lulls in what's going on. LSU had a game tonight. I think they played, was it Nicholls State, I believe, or whoever they played. The last time I checked, Garrett Nussmeier had 6 touchdowns. Another not necessarily stat padding game. It's just a game where you just play the game, but you're so much better than the other team. The stats are going to come. Stat padding would be getting 10 touchdowns, like I said earlier, getting 10 touchdowns and leaving them in there to get numbers, like they used to do back in the day with Andre Ware with the University of Houston when they beat SMU, who was just coming off of the death penalty, and they scored 98 points against them and had over 1,000 yards in total offense. That's stat padding. And he ended up winning the Heisman, and we saw how the rest of his career turned out in the NFL. So, yeah, that's stat padding. Or even Alabama State playing Prairie View years ago, winning 92-0. Now, that wasn't even stat padding. That was just a bad team out there. In fact, Prairie View took over the losing streak of what Columbia University, when they had the longest losing streak in the country in history, they set the record with 44, I believe, straight losses. And then Prairie View pretty much doubled them up, over 80 losses. So, yeah, thank God for them. But, yeah, so that wasn't even stat padding. That was just a bad team getting run over. And because everybody else did the same. They just didn't score 92 points. But, yeah, I know, right? I'm just like everywhere. But anyway, going down the list of other teams. Oh, yeah, the game that I said take the under on, and let's see if it actually worked out that way. No, it didn't. Iowa State. Iowa State pulls off the win against Iowa. So they went 20-19. 1 point. That game is almost always tight. 39 points. The over-under was 36.5. So they ruined the over-under. They ruined the under, by the way, because typically that game goes under. Iowa's defense is insane. I don't know who told Cade McNamara he was a good quarterback, because I'm sure it wasn't anyone from Michigan. That's why he left when J.J. McCarthy came in 2 seasons ago, well, now 3 seasons ago, and took his job. He got injured, and so what? They didn't care. It's like, yo, bro, it's over. Go. So, yeah, Cade McNown, not Cade McNown. We know about him, too, from UCLA years ago. But Cade McNamara, let's see what he had done. Just knowing all these guys is killing me. 99 yards. What is to be expected from him? 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns. That's the Cade McNamara I love and hate, depending on what I'm betting. But, yeah, he did his thing for them. In other words, losing. So, Iowa State, and that's an excellent rivalry, by the way. And that's another place I'm going to go. Kinnick Stadium in Iowa. I'm going there. One day I got to pick which day I want to go, which year. It might be next year. I don't know. But I'm going to go to Kinnick Stadium to watch one of those games. I think that's a hell of an atmosphere. Wyoming and Laramie. I want to go to one of those games too. I just go to games everywhere in the country. It doesn't matter. So that's it. That's just what I do. In addition to butchering shows. So yeah, LSU ended up winning 44-21. It was Nicholls State, another school in Louisiana, Division I AA school. And yes, he did end it with 6 touchdowns, 302 yards. that is what Garrett Nussmeier have. And going into the season, I had Garrett Nussmeier as a Heisman Trophy candidate as well. I thought that he might be the dark horse winner. But now we look at what Nico Malolieva is doing at Tennessee. I'm thinking that at 6'6", that little Polynesian thing going on, you had him, you had Tua, and now you got DJ that's kind of ruined it all. Well, DJ Uiagalelei from Florida State, from Clemson, from Oregon State, kind of ruined the little Polynesian thing we had going on. But you even go back in the day to Marquis Tuiasosopo, I can get that name right, who played at Washington, another one of those Polynesian players who you just enjoyed watching him play. But so yeah, it's Garrett Nussmeier, another solid night, 6 touchdowns is more than solid. But in any event, I'm just looking at these teams. Oklahoma having trouble, by the way, with Houston. Oklahoma beat Houston 16-12 in Norman. And that kind of boggles my mind because I think just last week, UNLV went to Houston and beat Houston. And now this week, UNLV scores over 70 points. And I'm thinking, okay, is UNLV really that good, even though it was against a pretty, I think it was Nevada Tech they played, whoever it was, not a good team. But to see what they've done in Houston and seeing the problem, you don't want to use the triangle theory, but what Houston had, what UNLV did to Houston and how Houston kept it close on the road against Oklahoma. I mean, hey, there may be something there because UNLV has been playing well the past couple of years. I mean, well for their standards. I remember because they were always bad. I mean, I remember there was a time when they had a quarterback named Jason Thomas, a lefty, who ended up, I think he came from Arkansas to go to UNLV, and he hurt himself, and you never heard about them again as being a good team. So you had to go back to the Ickey Woods days of when he used to play at UNLV, or even Randall Cunningham when he played at UNLV. And now we're talking the days of Wayne Nooney as the coach. And actually, I think he was the coach just after, whatever. Either way, let's go down the list of some of these teams. I'm about to end this thing soon. Bro, I'm getting like dehydrated up here. But if any one of you who are coming in here and want to post something, go ahead and post it. If you want to catch the link and come on live with us, you can do that as well. You can cam up and do it. You can put a question out there and do this. Just do it. We're going to try to do this every Saturday if possible because my days are so freaking packed, especially on the weekends. Unbelievable, but true. And as far as storylines go, this early in the season, you really don't want to get into a Heisman Trophy candidacy, wondering who's really going to win the Heisman because anything can happen and someone can come out of the woodwork and really, really do it. Team-wise, now with the playoff being what it is, 12 teams in the playoffs. Now Notre Dame has lost to Northern Illinois. Which teams look like they have an opportunity? It seems like a cliche question. Which teams look like they have the opportunity now? Because I would rather, what do you think about this? I would rather have the top 5 teams ranked in the beginning of the season, even probably give up the top 10. Just make a list of top 10, and everybody else doesn't matter because things change so much, and things just aren't the same. Going back to that analogy I used with TCU last season of how many players they lost from the previous season that got blown out by Georgia in the championship game, and then they came back and people used that as a gauge for how good Deion Sanders' team was coming from Colorado to TCU. He's playing against TCU. TCU's a favorite, but then you don't talk about the over 80% of the production that was lost from that team, including the quarterback, Max Duggan, who ended up going to the NFL. You don't mention any of that, and then when they go in and beat them, you make a bigger deal out of it than it should be. Even though he had about 80 plus players that he had thrown together and tried to get that chemistry going before the season started. And as it turned out, it just didn't happen that way. He's a little bit more judicious now because I think he put like 50 plus players this time. So it's going to go down. But football has too many moving parts to continuously try to strive for chemistry with different people. You have to, at some point, get some consistency and have continuity. You ultimately, at some point, you have to do that. You have to be able to develop players. You just can't cherry pick. In his case, he's going shopping, not even just cherry picking. He's shopping the entire grocery store. Pick your spots here and there. Find someone who's going to be that key player because apparently on the offensive line, which he was allegedly supposed to have improved this year, they had 0 yards rushing, at least the last time I checked. And in college football, it's different than the NFL. When you get sacked, they take away your rushing yards. So whatever the team did as a rushing hole, like for instance, if your running back's at 29 yards and your quarterback gets sacked so often for 30 yards, well, you'll have a negative 1 yard, run for that day. And that's how that works. Yeah, but either way, they had poor rushing last season, and they're having poor rushing this year, and they can't stop the run that well. And this is a Nebraska team that's in the making. Don't mistake this Nebraska team for being a finished product or even near finished product. This is a Nebraska team in the making that's making I'm not even going to say incremental improvement. I'm talking exponential because it's moving a lot faster. And because of the transfer portal and because of the way things are done now and the way kids come to school, it's going to speed up the process. So it becomes exponential instead of incremental. And it's better for the coaches too. And by the way, this doesn't have to do with today's games, but I did hear a story about how they may do away with National Letter of Intent Day. That may be a thing of the past. The NCAA has something going on right now. I can't remember exactly what it is. It's late at night. I should have just really thought about it before I came on here. It's just something that popped into my head. But yeah, they may get rid of the National Letter of Intent Day. Their kids will still go. But I think because of what's going on economically with NIL, et cetera, and people being tied into different, I guess, different, I don't know, I can't say institutions, well, different schools and whatnot, but different entities, I guess, whether it's commercial-wise and whatnot. Maybe like Dr. Pepper, you get to see Quinn Ewers in the Dr. Pepper commercial now because that's part of his NIL. The same way you saw Bryce Young in the Heisman House, part of his NIL deal. Well, you get to see, but anyways, I think there may be something to where it's probably best not to tie someone into a school when they probably could just leave at any time because of an NIL deal. So I guess that, even though the scholarships are only good from year to year, you know what I mean? So I don't know. And I also heard too that they may be changing they're likely going to change the opening and close dates for the transfer portal. Instead of the days they have now, I think they're going to narrow it down. I guess it's good for the coaches because it allows the coaches to know who the heck is going to be on their team. After they'll open it, they'll close it, but then they'll open it again, I guess, after spring practice. So the people who just know that they're not going to have a team or know that they can't make the team or get the playing time they think they needed or wanted, they can just get out and go. And the coach knows exactly who he has left over going into summer camp. I think that's what it is, but I think I have to do a little bit more reading on that. So as time keeps going on, and I'm trying to scroll here and figure out what more there is out here. There are other games. I mean, there's so many games today. Next time I'll write it down, it'll be a little bit more prepared, but this was a one-shot thing. Vanderbilt beats Alcorn State. Alcorn State is part of the SWAC, which I was talking about earlier. That's what Jackson State is, and that's what FAMU is now. They moved from the MEAC to the SWAC, along with Bethune-Cookman, moved from the MEAC to the SWAC. But yeah, they beat Alcorn State 55-0, which is good. I mean, not good that they blew them out like that. It's not good for Alcorn State. Alcorn State, Steve McNair's alma mater, by the way. But it's good because now Vanderbilt's 2-0. Now they have a win against Virginia Tech last week. And the reason why I picked them to beat Virginia Tech at the last second was Diego Pavia, the quarterback who came from New Mexico State, who I was on top of for the past couple of seasons. I just like watching him play. He was like Fran Tarkenton, little short guy, might not get to the NFL, but since Stetson Bennett got there, maybe he will too. Because Stetson Bennett's one of those moxie players, man, that he just exudes excitement and he looks like he can get it done regardless of his age. But Pavia reminds me a lot of that. And he came in. I didn't even know he went to Vanderbilt. And when I found out he did, I took them against Virginia Tech, and they upset Virginia Tech and Vandy. And now they're 2-0. And we know how 2-0 Vandy teams end up pretty bad later on. But let's see if anything changes because Diego is there to save. But in any event, I think I can end it right now for this first broadcast of this post-game or wrap-up of college football week number 2. Let's see if I can do a little better next week with college football week number 3. So until then, next time, let's do it.